Hello, welcome back to the channel, and this is a channel where we give you reviews, playthroughs, unboxings, and we generally like to talk a load of bollocks about tabletop gaming in general. And in this video we're going to be talking about a deck building game. We're going to be talking about Clank, a deck building adventure, and in this game you'll be wandering around a dungeon trying to loot an artifact, and then you'll try and get out of the dungeon with your arse intact. So in this video we're going to be giving you a very brief overview of the rules. We'll be telling you what we do like, what we don't like. Then we'll come back and we'll tell you whether or not Clank, a deck building adventure, is worth your time and bother today and in the future. So remember, if you're newer, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a comment in that section down below, and we'll see you after this.
Bollocks.
So Clank, a deck building adventure. How do you play this game? So you're going to dump the board out on the table. Each player's going to take their knight figure and they're going to stick it at the top left hand side of the board, right? Each player is going to start with a generic set of 10 cards. You're going to start with a burgle card, you're going to start with a stumble card, a sidestep card, a scramble card, and a load of other burgle and stumble cards. You'll notice that there are different icons on these cards. You've got blue diamonds, which is basically money that will allow you to purchase cards during your turn, and you've got boots that will allow you to move one space in the dungeon. On the stumble card you'll see it tells you that you have +1 clank, and when this happens you'll take one of your cubes and you'll dump it on the clank spot of the board. This is, thematically speaking, noise that you're going to be making when you traverse the dungeon. So the idea of this game is to move through the dungeon, pick up an artifact, and then get out before the time runs out, right? What you do, you'll shuffle your deck and you'll draw 5 cards. You'll always have 5 cards in your hand unless the cards tell you otherwise, and then what you do, you'll play all of these 5 cards and you'll use the icons on them and any text on them to take different actions. So if you draw a card with a boot on it, you'll be able to move one space. If you see on the board that there are some footstep spaces, and you'll have to play an extra boot to move through it. There's also sword icons, and this will allow you to defeat monsters. Each monster is a red card, and you'll see that there's swords on them, and you'll have to play that many swords to defeat the monster, and that will give you the benefit that is on the monster. The poor old goblin is always there to beat up, so if you fancy getting some cheap gold pieces, then just whack the goblin. So you'll also see on the board that there are spaces with monster heads. Here you'll have to play swords to get through those spaces, or you'll have to take a wound. You've got crystal cavern spaces where you will have to stop. You can't use any extra movement unless you play a teleportation card. There's a market space where you'll be able to buy stuff from the market. You'll pay 7 gold and you'll be able to buy one of the tokens there. It might be a backpack that allows you to carry one extra artifact, because ordinarily you only be able to carry 1. So if you decide to buy a card, you'll take it, you'll put it in your discard pile, and then you'll replace the card at the end of your turn. If a card comes out that's got a dragon symbol on it, then the dragon gets really, really angry. You'll take all the clank that's in the clank space and you'll stick it in the bag. You'll draw out a number of cubes that's equal to the space where the dragon is, right? So if the dragon's in a space with 3 cubes on it, you'll draw 3 cubes. If any of the cubes that are taken out belong to the players, then you'll take damage and you'll put these cubes on the damage track. If they're black cubes, you just put them aside, right? So there's spaces with major and minor secrets. What you do, if you cross these spaces, then you'll be able to just pick them up and it'll give you a benefit. And then there's artifacts. You'll pick one of them up, and once you've picked up an artifact, you need to get out as quickly as possible. Once one player gets out of the dungeon, then the race is on. There's only going to be 4 turns left. Every turn that a player who got out will move their token one space closer towards the end game. If any players get out, they get a 20-point bonus for doing so. Once the player who first left the dungeon reaches space 4, the game will end, and if any players are left in the deeper part of the dungeon, they won't get any points. They'll basically be dead. And if you're in the upper part of the dungeon, then the locals will come and rescue you, and you will be able to score points, but you won't get that 20-point advantage, right? So once the game's over, you'll add up all your victory points. You'll look at the victory points on your artifact. You'll look at the victory points from any tokens that you acquired. You'll get victory points equal to the amount of gold you got, and you'll also get victory points that are on the cards that you accumulated in your deck. And the player with the most victory points will be the winner of Clank, a deck building adventure. So what do we like about Clank, a deck building adventure? So the first thing that we really like about it is this game always provides a real tense finish. The fact that one player can set the clock in motion by maybe grabbing like a cheap artifact and just doing a bunk real quick, that leaves the other player scrambling, and if you're down in the depths of the dungeon going for that 20-point artifact, then you are going to be literally shitting your pants to get out, right? So there is a sort of decent level of planning in this. You need to make sure you've got enough boots to get out. You've got to make sure you've got enough swords to get out quickly by going through those monster spaces on the way out, right? So you're constantly watching all the other players, trying to think, where are they going in the dungeon? Are they going to go for that cheap, nasty, dirty artifact, or are they going to go for the really nice looking, tasty artifact down the bottom, right? And the fact that there's also loads and loads of other bits and bobbins that you can go for on your way means that sometimes going for that cheap artifact might just be enough, right? So the second thing that we really like about Clank is that success and failure in this game is directly down to what you decide to put in your deck throughout the game, right? The fact that you're going to be using all 5 cards means that everything bar those 10 cards at the start is going to be down to decisions that you make. Nobody else is going to be putting those cards in your deck, right? So if you get slaughtered in this game, it's down to you. Okay, there is a random sort of card draw in there when you're replacing cards, but generally you're going to get some decent options no matter what, right? So no one's going to be holding your hand in this game. It's all down to you. So if you fuck it up, it's your fault. So the final thing that we like about Clank is that there is a massive variety of cards in this game. I can't even remember if there's any duplicates in here, but you're going to get a really wide variety of cards, and because there's 6 out every turn, there's always going to be something that you are going to want to pick up. So for instance, you might want to do over the spotter. This says whenever the spotter is out, you'll pull 1 extra cube for dragon attacks, and if you defeat it, each player may make +1 Clank to get 2 gold, and you get -2 Clank, right? So you might have the 1-shot dragon shrine. This also lets you pull 1 extra cube for dragon attacks, and it says you get 2 gold, or you can trash a card in your play area or discard pile. So this card's useful for getting rid of those shitty burgle cards that nobody really wants. Or you might have the swagger card. It allows you to get 1 boot, and it says for each Clank you make this turn, you get extra money to spend on cards. Right, so this is sort of one of those situations where you're going to have something nice happen to you in return for something shit happening to you. Right, this deck is huge. There's about 100 odd cards in here. That sort of variety is what makes the game really, isn't it? So what don't we like about Clank? So the first thing that we don't like about this game is that it looks like completely like dog shit, doesn't it? I don't like the colour scheme. It's like brown and blacks and all that sort of thing. It looks really washed out, and I just don't like looking at it. It looks like I'm looking at a fresh, creamy cow pat, right? It's just horrible to look at. And if you add to that the sort of ropey component quality, I mean, we've played this a lot, and the cards are starting to go round the edges, right? Why they chose to have black borders on the cards, I've no idea. Because in a deck building game, that's the last sort of colour you want, because they're going to get scratched and worn out, and the cards are thin. I just don't like it at all. It just could have been drawn better. The board just looks really awful, and it just doesn't really feel like you're moving around a dungeon, right? So yeah, game looks like shit. So the second thing we don't like about Clank, a deck building adventure, is there's a sort of a weird disconnect between what's actually happening on the ground and what is presented on the cards. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? When you move through a monster space, you don't actually fight any monsters. The monsters just appear in the card offer for you to defeat randomly, right? Wouldn't it have been better to have a separate monster stack, so when you move through that space you have to fight monsters, right? It's just not thematic enough. Another example of this is the goblin is always available to get whacked, which seems a bit weird. There's just this big stack of goblins that are flying around a dungeon, right? The artwork on the cards doesn't match your character. Your character's like this anonymous being with no facial features. There's no human aspect to your figure, but when you look at the cards, there's all sorts of different types of human characters on the thing. So there's this weird disconnect between the world that you inhabit and the world that is presented on the cards that you're going to be playing, right? So the final thing that we don't like about Clank, a deck building adventure, is the fixed nature of the board. Yeah, I know that Clank in Space has got a modular board. We're not talking about that bleeding game, are we? So shut the fuck up. But yeah, the fixed nature of the board means that each itinerary into the dungeon is going to be largely the same, and what this means is that the more you play it, the more you're going to know the best routes through the dungeon. And if you're playing with new players, they're not going to really know the best routes to go based on the cards that are going to be drawn, right? So it sort of favours more experienced players. I suppose that's the same for a lot of games really, but even so, they could have had a modular system. If you think like Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, which is a nasty, horrible little game, you think about the tiles in that game, maybe they could have had some tiles that you could put together, or maybe draw a blind or something, or do whatever. A real modular board system, not just boards shoved together, but maybe corridors attached to rooms would have been a better idea for this. So to summarise, is Clank a deck building adventure worth your time and bother today and in the future? So we're going to say, yes, absolutely. We really do enjoy playing this game, right? It's not without its flaws, but it is an enjoyable deck building experience that does provide some really, really tense finales. It looks like complete shit, right? There's no getting away from that. The board looks absolutely awful. And it sort of does feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between what's happening on the cards and actually what's happening on the ground. But it does do something unique. It was one of the first games that took a deck building mechanism and actually added some sort of linear story to it, or loose linear story, right? And as such, it is a bit of a step up from games like Dominion and Marvel Legendary, right? There's loads and loads of expansions for this. There's different maps. There's the Adventuring Party, which lets you play with 6 players and gives you unique character abilities. And then there's Clank in Space here, which we're not going to talk about. We'll talk about that later. But there's a wealth of stuff for this game. So we do recommend Clank a deck building adventure. Just be wary that it looks fucking awful. So there you go. That's a Clank a deck building adventure. Remember, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to this channel. Hit the like button, comment, and all that bollocks. We'll see you next time.